Well, we are going to go ahead and get started, even though we still have people joining us from our waiting room. But my name is Carrie Knuth. I'm the Assistant Director of Student Life for the Ivy Tech Fort Wayne and Warsaw campus. And today, for our last big presentation for the semester, we are joined by our Diversity Council and also GOAL y Amigos. They're going to present about Cinco de Mayo and some of the things above and beyond the party of Cinco de Mayo. But first, before I turn it over to our GOAL y Amigos president, I just wanted to let you guys know that I will be joining you a little later to do our prize drawing. So today we are giving away a $50 Target gift card live at the end of this presentation. So stay tuned for that. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Susanna, our president for GOAL y Amigos, and she's going to introduce our event today. Take it over, Susanna.
Hello, everyone. My name is Susanna Reese. I am the president of GOAL y Amigos. At GOAL, our mission is to educate, engage, and support Ivy Tech students by promoting events and leadership opportunities that advance the Latino culture. On behalf of the Student Life Office, the Fort Wayne Warsaw Diversity Council, and GOAL y Amigos, I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today. Ivy Tech Community College is dedicated to establishing a sustainable culture where everyone is respected, accepted, and valued, with a commitment to civility, in which we encourage professional and academic development with an open communication, honesty, empathy, and respect. We seek to create a platform to begin dialogue on topics that can sometimes lead to uncomfortable but necessary conversations that can express differing or controversial viewpoints. As an institution of higher learning, we know the importance of having discussions where people can safely touch on social issues and current events. Disclaimer: this presentation may not be suitable for all, as topics related to sexual assault and consent will be discussed. Self-care and discretion is encouraged and supported. If you or someone you know has been a victim of sexual assault or needs resources, please contact the college Title IX coordinator, Heidi Fowler, at hfowler9@ivytech.edu or at 260-480-4269. Contact information will be included in our chat. At this time, I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Lori Rose. However, before I do, I want to remind everyone to keep your video on mute, and please feel free to drop questions in the chat at any point of the presentation. Lori Rose is a passionate educator, artist, coach, and founder of the Rose Model. She believes in the power of anti-oppression and authentic connection to change the world. As a survivor herself, Lori's mission became breaking the cycle of interpersonal violence and embodying a new paradigm of relationship to self and others. She has spoken throughout the U.S. at colleges, organizations, and at the stage of TEDx, sharing her transformational truth and advocacy for healthy connection and healing. Lori holds a BS from Indiana University and a certificate in sexual health education from the University of Michigan. After teaching ballroom and Latin dance focused on wheelchair dancing, she serves as a project manager for the Indianapolis Greenways. Lori devoted 11 years as executive director of a nonprofit organization in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where she also co-founded the dance group Salsa Loca and initiated a 1 Billion Rising Fort Wayne, part of a global movement to end violence against women and girls. Lori has won awards including the State of Indiana, Sagamore of Wabash, Greater Fort Wayne Business Weekly 40 Under 40, Indiana State Trail Advocacy Award, and the YWCA Award for Domestic Violence Prevention and Intervention. In her spare time, you'll find her exploring the South Carolina landscape, hosting impromptu outdoor dancing, and finding ways to keep laughing at herself. At this time, I would like to direct everyone's attention to Lori Rose.
Susanna, thank you so much for the introduction, and hello everyone. I'm Lori Rose, and I am so grateful to be here. Thank you to GOAL y Amigos and Dr. Alvarez for inviting me today. And as we step into this topic about Cinco de Mayo, more than a party, talking about consent and healthy sexuality, the first thing I'd like to do is give us permission. The number one thing people tell me when they arrive at a talk about sexuality is that they have reservations about it being awkward. So I just want to get that out of the way and embrace awkward. And I'd actually like to set the space where you're getting to connect here virtually, so we get to create our own room. And I'm going to share a song here in a moment. It's by one of my favorites, if not my favorite band from Guadalajara, Mexico, Mana. And the song is called Bendita la Toulouse. And it is talking about kind of sanctifying the space. I encourage you to watch the video on your own time because it's really about seeing each other for our full humanity. But as I play a few seconds of this music, what I want to invite you to do is just take a few breaths and allow yourself, wherever you are, however messy or imperfect or however you might feel right now, to arrive in this space. One way that we can do this is tuning in to our own heartbeat and our own breathing. And you can even do a movement, which I'm going to do. You can raise your hands up to the sky on an inhale, circle your arms back down on an exhale, but there's no right or wrong way to move your body. So as I go to share this music, I just want to think about the permission to be. Sexuality is a fundamental aspect of being a human being, and using our breath, our movement, we can arrive in our space here for Cinco de Mayo, more than a party, as humans. So I'm going to play, Susana, if you could let me know if you don't hear the music. So taking a second, moving, stretching your own body, going to your own breathing.
Bendito el lugar y el motivo de estar ahí. Bendita la coincidencia. Bendito el reloj que nos puso puntual ahí. Bendita sea tu presencia. Bendito Dios por encontrarnos en el camino y de quitarme esta soledad de mi destino. Bendita la luz, bendita la luz de tu mirada, bendita la luz.
I could turn our entire time together into a dance party. but I will not. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. And as I do this, anything going back to that music, if you do speak Spanish, it talks about the place, the time, and the light in our humanity. So anything that you might need to shake out or let go of, or get yourself some water, anything that you need to do to fully arrive in our time and our space. We are going to get started and talking about Cinco de Mayo. So Cinco de Mayo, more than a party. This photo is of us 3 years ago, and today we're together in a different time, in a different space, and we're going to go on a journey and gather some tools to implement healthy consent and sexuality as not only skills for ourselves, for our intimate partnerships, but for our lives. I have a little bit of a icebreaker just to get us thinking and moving and interacting together. So if you could type in the chat, which one of these kitties in isolation resonates the most with you right now in this time and space in your human imperfection. They're numbered 1 through 9 if you can't see the numbers, but if you could just type in really quickly, and that'll give me a chance to connect with you. So I'm seeing, I get that 3 a lot, tucked in the blanket. 6 with finals coming up. Yes, that has been me preparing for the content that I want to present to you today. 3 sicky doodles. Hope you feel better. All right, thank you so much for sharing. So I want to talk more specifically about why we are here. So today is Cinco de Mayo, and this commemorates the 1862 Battle of Puebla in Puebla, Mexico. And some people get Cinco de Mayo confused with Mexican Independence Day, which is in September. Cinco de Mayo specifically celebrates a battle in which the Mexican forces were significantly outnumbered by the French, who came in trying to take over all of Mexico via Mexico City. But when they got to Puebla, the Mexican forces took a stand and rose up, and they won this battle. And so today we commemorate this. And I have this symbol here of flags, just thinking about this tie to us as human beings, as individuals, and our connections to each other. The Battle of Puebla reminds me of, in this day and age, that we face a lot of significant issues. And even though it might not look like we're winning the war right away, so the Mexican forces did not win that particular war, but they changed the trajectory of history by taking a stand. And so as you think about what brings you here today, I invite you to think about your ancestors and the people who came before you and fought for you to be here, standing here. And I want to tell you a little bit more about what brings me here. I am here because I believe in you. And scientists actually crunched the data on this. The chances of you arriving to this moment, having been born to the people who conceived and gave birth to you with the unique DNA, talents, traits only you have the day and time you were born, the chances are 1 in 400 trillion. So you are already a survivor, and I believe that you have something in you that you deserve to live and that the world very much needs. Unfortunately, when we talk about things like sexuality and connection relationships, the flip side of this is that if we are unhealthy in relationship, in who we are, or who we are in relationship to other people, our 1 in 400 trillion gets severed. And I'm here today seeking to take a stand with you, to call you in to take a stand with me, and for us to carry with us tools to reclaim, to revive, and to carry forward our 1 in 400 trillion. Another note about Cinco de Mayo, I intentionally included a map here that's not from the Battle of Puebla, but it's from prior to that, from 1848. And this was the end of the US-Mexican War, when the northern half of the country of Mexico was ceded to the US. And so there's this saying in activism that we didn't cross the border crossed us. So I think it's really important to notice that all of the places that we know now as California, Nevada, Wyoming, parts of Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas as part of that, those were all initially parts of Mexico. And that the culture that we celebrate today is more indigenous to that land than the Anglo-Saxons who came in and took over. And so I really want to honor that as we celebrate all that the Mexican people have gifted to our culture in the United States. We're also going to talk about alcohol because that is very closely tied into the celebration. And unfortunately, alcohol can be overused and can be dangerous. Alcohol does not cause sexual assault, but it is correlated, it is linked with about 50% of sexual assaults. So we're going to address that today. And finally, we're going to reclaim joy that this beautiful culture teaches us. We're going to stay focused on solutions today. So as we take a journey, we've got 3 sections here. And Susanna, I want to emphasize if questions do come up, please interrupt me. I'll stop at the end of each section so that we have time to address questions. But as we dive in, we're going to start off with unveiling what it is that we're not talking about so that we can shine a light on it. And that's the only way that we can make changes, if we can name it and address it. And from there, we're going to move through the silence, shame, and secrecy to look at how we can cultivate what I call intimate intelligence. And then finally, we're going to practice in our time today tools that you can implement not only to create healthy sexuality, but a healthy life. A few agreements before we dive into some more vulnerable material. When we talk about sexuality, we know that it brings up a full spectrum of human emotion, all the way from feelings of elation, connection with the divine, to feelings worse than death. So I want to invite you to do whatever you need to take care of yourself. I did that first exercise very intentionally with our breathing during Bendita tu Luz, so that you can always use that to check in. You can even take that with you to gauge healthy connection. Check in with how well can I breathe at this time in this space and in connection with this other human being. Of course, we'll show respect here. This is another life skill focusing on the behavior, not the person. So if you feel like you need to call something out, please address the behavior, and we'll stay away from blaming, shaming, belittling, and diminishing anyone's personhood. Next, speak for yourself. So this meme says when you're eating out and the waiter asks if you want a refill on chips and salsa, and your friend says, no, I think we're okay. So we're not going to make assumptions or generalizations or say anything like all men or all women do this kind of thing. We can use I statements and speak for ourselves. Going back to self-care, being present in this space to the extent that you are able to, so that you get the most out of our time. All of your questions are welcome. There is no such thing as a stupid question. And lastly, your expression is welcome. That includes thinking for yourself. That includes taking with you what is helpful and leaving what isn't. And I also want to call attention to consciousness, the racial consciousness that I am one white passing, white privileged individual who will be sharing pieces of my story. And my story is not the only story. Everyone's story matters equally, and it is imperative that we bring other voices and perspectives into our lives and into our spaces. So before I continue, Susanna, anyone else in the chat, are there any agreements that you think I forgot? Okay. So I want to acknowledge statistically that I'm not the only survivor in our space. We know that when we arrive at the doorstep of a college campus, that at least 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys have already experienced sexual violence. These photos are actually in Fort Wayne when I started doing this work as a volunteer. And when I stepped forward as a survivor, as you can tell, people representing every age group and background raised their hands before Me Too was a hashtag. And said, yeah, this applies to me as well. So I want to respect that with great care and look at today how we reclaim our personhood. I also want to emphasize that absolutely anyone can be on any side of harm. Because in statistics, most assaults, unfortunately, are perpetrated by men, about 90%. Sometimes men come into my talks feeling like they're going to be attacked. And I want you to know that's not the case. I hold more stories of men who have experienced harm than I could ever share. So please, let's keep that in mind, that any of us can be on any side of this. We're going to continue ahead on our journey, and I included the etymology of this word because there are a lot of myths around taking a journey, going through life changes like college. And the biggest mistake I've ever made was thinking that I've arrived somewhere, like ta-da. So I want to emphasize that a journey is continuous. The word talks about a day's journey. It renews every day, every moment. So I ask you in any moment, just what is the next smallest step that you can take? I also look at the word to rise. It's a word that's co-opted as well. I hear a lot, and as someone who is neurodivergent and who has struggled with mental health differences, suicidal ideation, I hear a lot people talk about this linear journey as though like, oh, you've overcome that and it's all in the past. I want to emphasize that all of our journeys happen in spirals. I got obsessed with spirals while I was putting my slides together. We are always traveling in this spiral through space and time. And this means that things can come up again and again in our lives, but we're always revisiting them from a new perspective. So today, each day, you can ask yourself, am I willing to go on a little journey right now? So I want to dive into a story here. And I invite you to imagine all the way back to being 6 years old. Imagine that you wake up in the middle of the night and you hear strange foreign noises. And fortunately, with no reason to be too afraid, you decide to go and scope it out. Tiptoeing into the hallway, you determine that these noises are actually coming from your parents' room. And with the curiosity of a good child, just as a kid is designed to do, you decide to go and investigate. So this was me at 6 years old. And the next thing I did was tiptoed and placed my hand on my parents' doorknob, twisted slowly, and peeked my eyes and nose into their bedroom just enough to see if I needed to be worried. What I saw stunned me, and my eyes became instantly saucer-sized. I saw bodies, it seemed, floating in mid-air, suspended high above the bed. And as I adjusted my eyes a bit more, I realized, indeed, that was my dad's bum, undulating in a wavy kind of motion, light glistening off of skin. Wow, I thought, is this magic? How are they doing this? How is this even possible? Time absolutely froze in this observation. But the next thing I remember, I was back in my bed, sitting apprehensively, as my parents filed in, not together, but one by one, to talk with me. There was some kind of message about this was something that people do when they're really in love and committed to each other, and that did stick with me in life. I think I remember my dad stifling some laughter, but what stuck out to me the most, crystal clearly, was my mom sitting on my bed nervously and saying to me, "Lori, honey, I want you to know that Dad wasn't hurting me. Okay, I promise, I'm okay. Dad wasn't hurting me. Huh? My whole image of this magical scene popped like a bubble in the driveway. And what I carried with me all of a sudden were these two messages: that Dad was in charge and that there was potential for harm in this act that I thought was magical and ethereal. And with that, taking a breath, I'd like you to reflect a little bit. And you can type in the chat if anything pops up, and it's okay if not, you can keep it to yourself and we'll move forward. But were there any earliest messages when you think of your very first exposure to sexuality? Like mine being that boys and men were in charge, or there was potential for harm. Is there anything that pops up in your mind as to the earliest messages that were given to you? And I'll pause just a second there. As we think about this, and you can still add things in the chat, all of the messages, all of the issues, and all of the solutions that we are going to unpack today occur along these three levels. So we have the individual level, and we can use these ducks in water as an analogy. So the individual level is each duck has a beak and can voice whatever they decide to voice. There's the community level, and these ducks are traveling somewhere together. So the community level is the action here of the paddling, where we choose to go. And lastly, there's the social, the systemic level, and that's the actual water. And as you decide what you take with you today, you can make a difference at any one of these levels at any time. So next, Dr. Alvarez, are you able to bring up the poll question, the first poll question? So I'm going to give us just a few seconds to answer because I want your knee-jerk responses.
Lori, just so you know, the three questions will come out one after the other, all three.
Oh, so all at the same time? That works. Okay, so this first one, as quickly as you possibly can, you can choose up to 3 answers. So growing up, coming from school, being exposed to media, being exposed to porn, being exposed to whatever type of education you received, whether that be religious influence, siblings or mentors or caregivers, what were the top, you can choose up to 3, but what were the top sources of information for your own sexual learning? So I'll give you just a few seconds. So I'm going to just count down so we get those in. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it looks like parents and caregivers was our top choice, our top source of information, followed by peers, followed by mentors and other adults. And then we have a smattering of other answers as well. So Dr. Alvarez, are these... Okay, so we're answering
I can go ahead and relaunch the polling. I'll go ahead and close it out here and then relaunch it for the next question when you're ready to ask.
Oh, okay. Okay, perfect. So we can close that. So it looks like direct sources of information is where we're getting the majority of our sexual learning. And I want to unpack quickly 10 things that we don't talk about, that we don't tend to talk about, and why. And As we do this, I would just like you to think about what matches up with your experience as well as what doesn't. Because remember, if we can shine a light on something, we have the power to do something about it. So the first thing that we don't tend to talk about is what sexuality actually is. This definition is lifted straight from Google. And while Google has improved over the years that I've been doing this, they're still wrong in how they define sexuality. So let's look at what sexuality actually is. It encompasses this entire colorful spectrum that impacts us every day of our lives. So I matched up here on the right-hand side in colors, kind of the flowers on the petals. So I'm starting with the purple. Sexuality encompasses all of these aspects of our identity, from our biological sex to our gender to our orientation. Moving from there to intimacy, that includes our relationships, our communication, our sense of trust, emotional connection. Sensuality, next. The definition is anything that has to do with the senses. So the way we view our bodies, our sense of pleasure, just our experience in the world. Next, sexual behaviors and practices. These can be on a spectrum, so they can be used in what could be a positive manner, like flirting or not, or they can be used in a destructive manner, like exploitation and violence. And then finally, sexual and reproductive health in the aqua. That's what school and most people tend to think of when we say sex or sexuality, but it's actually a tiny little fraction. So we're going to unpack that a little bit further. What influences our sexuality? There are these 4 quadrants, and kind of thinking back to those individual, community, and systemic levels. The biological and psychological are individual, and things that could influence us not to talk about what's real and about sexuality are the fact that our brain is designed to protect us. It's designed to survive. My little skull and crossbones symbolizes trauma and the shame and difficult emotions that comes from that. The theater masks we often veil our real feelings because it's so difficult. It can be so difficult to talk about these topics. In culture, our education or lack thereof, or how social norms tell us to define ourselves. And then ethically, our worldviews influence sexuality as well. We don't talk about people as sexual beings throughout the entire lifespan, from the day we are born till the day we take our last breath. This tends to scare people sometimes, but it doesn't have to be scary. As long as we understand consent and healthy sexuality, there is developmentally appropriate interaction at every age. But sexuality is part of the core of who we are as humans. We don't talk about fear of the unknown. So here is a spectrum of one aspect of sexual orientation. You may have heard of Alfred Kinsey from Indiana University. This is way back in the 50s. Interestingly enough, he was only studying white men in college, and he still came up with this amount of diversity and variety. In fact, his research in human sexuality showed that the only known variable, the only known thing about human sexuality that's consistent is variation. So everything about us is on some sort of a spectrum, from our gender, our biological sex, the way that we develop in the womb. We actually start off the very same for the first 6 to 7 weeks in utero. And then there's a wash of androgens and our genitalia start to differentiate. And human beings, just like anything else in our bodies, human beings can end up on a spectrum from the female body to the male body to anything in between. And that is normal and beautiful and healthy. But what happens when the fear that our brain is wired to do takes over, and we try to control sexuality. Well, this is an image I lifted straight from a sexual health curriculum. We medicalize, we clinicalize. I know that this image of like focusing on disease and danger makes me want to run in the other direction. Takes away all of the possible connection and pleasure and magic that we can experience with healthy sexuality. What else do we not talk about? When we leave out all of that uncertainty, there's this whole missing middle. So there tends to be this polarity between like lock it down, those images on the left, and in your face, the images on the right. The pimp and hoe party graphic. So what do we leave out in the missing middle? Well, luckily we're going to talk about the rose model, which will give us human tools. So what we tend to leave out is this sense of self-reflection, self-awareness that it takes to connect on a human level, facing what's real in shame and trauma, having hard conversations, being vulnerable, building trust, and sharing intimacy. My screen is stalling just a little bit as I click, so I'm going to click ahead with hopes that my slides will catch up. Do you see the slide that says beautiful diversity? Perfect. So these are images of dahlias. Oops. Hopefully it's going back. I studied a lot about Mexican heritage and culture for this presentation, and dahlias are the national flower of Mexico. And what I want to emphasize about these dahlia tubers and then the flowers is there's a parallel that we all have the same parts organized differently. So in those tubers, there's everything that that dahlia needs to survive and turn into the beautiful flowers. And in humans, every size, every shape, every color, every variety is beautiful and normal and perfect. We don't talk about confusing messages that we receive. So these are straight from interviews and focus groups that I've done. People get messages that your body is dangerous, but then they hear love your body. We don't talk about sex, especially from those influences that you mentioned, like parents and caregivers. But then with our peers, we're supposed to know what we're doing and what we're talking about. We need to talk about intersectionality and sex. And this is a huge topic. We could spend a whole semester on it, but I want to emphasize a few key points for today. Intersectionality talks about all of our identity markers that we do not necessarily choose. And this is tied to oppression, which is social, unfair, and unjust treatment or power over certain groups of people. The rose model and what we're going to talk about today is a power with model. And so we have to address the inequities that we face in society. So looking at this graph, there are all these identity markers, and intersectionality talks about how any one of these and any combination of these, our gender, our heritage, our ability, our race or class or age can all intersect and impact our lived experience in different ways. There's this term called implicit bias, and you may have heard this, especially fortunately this year, we've been doing excellent work, needed work in racial justice. All of those principles apply to sexuality. So if you look at these top words, the top two lines, and read them in your head as quickly as you can, and you focus on the color of the word, and register how easy or not it is to do that. And then switch your eyes to the bottom and try to read in your head the color of the word. And how easy or not was it to do that? So thinking about when we are taught throughout our entire lives to associate one thing that we see with a certain interpretation. And we're going to translate this to messages about sexuality. I'd really like to invite your voices here into the chat. I have a few slides of media messages. So these are things that you see without your consent throughout your life, just like the air that we breathe. So would anyone like to share or type in the chat what comes to mind? This is depictions of the feminine, about what it means to be a girl or what it means to be a woman when you see these images.
These images are disparaging. It's highly sexualized. I mean, like the pop chips over the breast. This joke over here about the fries, Esquire magazine. This one tries to, the one with the t-shirt, it tries to lead you to think that she's not a good person because she's frowning because she's concerned about her weight. But then there's a smile on the other side. It's just very disparaging.
Yes, thank you. And so interesting, you know, the celebration of different body types. Does that person need to lose weight to be any more beautiful or even any more healthy? No. You know, but this is what is pushed. Thank you so much for sharing. Looking at that concept of intersectionality. So that image at the bottom that says sex from Esquire magazine. This is an actor who is Latina. The image at the top right, the woman who is Black. What are these images telling us? How are they intersecting those identities? And what are they telling us about those identities? So there's this, the ad says animal over the image of the Black woman. And that is exceedingly racist and problematic throughout all of history, exotifying women of color, hypersexualized. Yes, thank you. So I'm going to move to the masculine images. You can type fast enough. Yes, thank you. So looking at what it means to be a boy, what it means to be a man, what kind of assumptions are we making? And in these images, there is also a boy and a man who is Black. And how are they portrayed differently than the boys and the man who are white in these images? And you can unmute or jump in. You can type aggressive. Yes.
Very aggressive. Like the LeBron thing over there, like you can only play basketball if you're a person of color. That's the only way you can get further in this. But the two of the children, sorry, I only date models. That's a sexualized image that says to little boy that this is what you need to do when you grow up. You can't accept the young lady next door because she isn't as sexy as this other girl. And the image of the fighter, you're aggressive, you're evil, you're something to avoid. And as a child, they're looking at this person and they're saying, that's an adult. We look at it and say, that's a little kid. Yes. But other people look at it and say, oh, I can treat him, I can abuse him because he's an adult.
Yes, thank you so much. I see a comment, not just Black men, and weaving these threads together and going back to that image of the ducks in the water, the individual, community, and societal levels. when we look at all types of violence, so from suicides to intimate partner violence, sexual violence, elder abuse, dating violence, all types of violence, and all of the risk factors in society, that includes media and policies and laws and institutions. The top 2 societal risk factors are 1, normalizing aggressive behavior, and 2, harmful gender norms. And so something that I take from that is it is terrifying to see what's in our face every day, but also it gives me a sense of hope in that we can do something about this. It's going to take us time to dismantle and rebuild equitable policies and institutions in every single level that we need to, but normalizing aggressive behavior and dismantling harmful gender norms and honoring humanity is something that we can do in our daily interactions. I'm going to move on. I appreciate you continuing to share. And Susanna, if you can please collect any comments and questions so that we make sure to get to them. So we talked about those messages, and then these images are even greater objectifying to all genders and sexualizing. And so this quote, it's from a documentary called Misrepresentation, that turning a human being into a thing is almost always the first step in justifying violence toward that person. And I want to quickly cover something called objectification theory. This is from a study that was about women, but I want us to think about how this can apply to anyone and specifically to any marginalized populations. But when culture sexually objectifies, in this case, the feminine body, women internalize that as their own perspective. So go through their day-to-day lives seeing themselves and especially their physical bodies as an observer. And think about how this translates into sex and sexuality. That increases body shame and anxiety. And it also influences us to, when we make choices about all of these things to buy and do and chemicals and you name it, that changes our physical appearance, objectification moves us to think that we're doing these things as freely chosen, that we need to do these things. And a question to ask is, who profits? Who benefits from this? So going back to what I said about normalizing aggression and harmful gender norms, those norms, they don't just hurt those who are marginalized, they hurt those who have privilege as well. So here talking about the gender binary, norms that tell men who they're supposed to be harm men. They don't allow themselves to be full humans with full spectrums of emotion and vulnerability and who need connection and dignity and safety and trust just like anyone else. So wrapping up the things that we don't talk about, given all of these factors, we don't talk about the behaviors that we tend to go to. So in our relational, personal lives, we compare, we compete, we control when we are taught this power over model. And interestingly, I chose this image of this oppression tree because compare, compete, control are also mirrored in systems of oppression. How this can appear in interpersonal and sexual violence. This is a real example from a father of this boy who was going to college. He was going to prom here. And the father bragged about on Facebook this message that that's right, you know, daddy taught him good old Southern charm. It works every time. It turned out that in college, this gentleman perpetrated a gang rape and is now in prison for 15 years. And this is his sex offender registry. But this is an extreme example, but shows how we can take that trajectory from normalized aggression, all of these unhealthy messages, to making choices that don't serve humanity. The last thing in my sexual health ed, things that we don't talk about, is how we actually define violence and abuse. So I call this, what we tend to see the most often, I call it monsterizing. So you can see the headlines here. This is what we tend to see, like sickest perv teacher ever, or rape in the suburbs. There's racism thrown in here with Asian sex gangs. These headlines in our faces. For me, armed with this, what I knew to look out for in life was this extreme, like someone coming out of the woods with swinging a bat at me. And if that didn't happen, I thought I was good. I had no idea of the whole spectrum of violence. Yeah. So I want you to picture in your own mind, when we think about this whole spectrum of violence, what comes to mind? What images come to mind when you picture childhood sexual violence, suicidal ideation, campus violence, rape, domestic violence? Who does this happen to? What kind of childhood do you think they must have had? What kind of family environment or neighborhood or community comes to mind? Did anyone picture this? I know I sure didn't. I still don't when I ask myself those questions. So this is me and my mom and dad. I was about 5 or 6 at the time of that story. And there was no child abuse in my home, no substance abuse, none of the stereotypical risk factors. Yet I experienced every one of those things. Yes, it can happen to anyone. There's something I'd like to share with you that is a spoken word piece that I've written that shares my own story. This is the first time that I have shared spoken word in a public setting. So I want to ask for your grace and your knowledge that this is different for me than sharing a personal story that I wrote for an audience. I wrote this as a healing journey for myself, and it turned out that it wraps a lot of lessons into it. So I would like to share it with you with the hope that you can do whatever you need to take care of yourself, and that we can take this to start our journey of healing and of repair. So this is called, I Didn't Call It That. You assaulted me, but I didn't call it that. My breathing stopped as though a vacuum had sucked the air out, or maybe the life out of my lungs, limbs, torso. As though the more life that left, the less I knew where your hands were going. The less I felt the terror of parts shattering. I was 11, 10, trying to sleep. I had no words for assault, no understanding. There was nothing to tell anyone anyway, since not that much had happened, right? Is this how it is when I don't reciprocate someone's feelings? The vacant hollowness consumed me so instantly, eyes shut tight, impermeable shields slammed down over me so pervasively that I didn't even think about it for decades. You assaulted me, but I didn't call it that. You were in charge as my coach. My well-being depended on your care for me, like a well-trained puppy, I guess. You walked up and started unbuttoning my blouse out of clear blue nowhere. Why was I wearing that damn button-down blouse anyway? Was it that cobalt blue standing out too much? I don't think I ever wore it again. Why was I the last damn one in that room? I stopped you, but not before you made your mark, invaded my skin with more poison, imprinted another hidden but oozing gash, and more life took its cue to escape. You assaulted me, but I didn't call it that. I was trying to sleep. Oh, my body knows how to get through this one. The dead thing. I don't know how I felt after that. The numbness lasted for years. You assaulted me, but I didn't call it that. You said with a smile, the beauty of it is, no one ever needs to know a thing about this. Right, because I was mischievous, dirty? Is that what this is? The other day, in fact, a man told me his girlfriend had experienced no assaults because she had led a clean, simple life. How did I get sent down the wrong conveyor belt? How did I take so many damn wrong turns? You assaulted me, but I didn't call it that. When we worked together at camp, and you, and you, and you, it was all a thick, giant, heavy, lung-clogging haze. It's a thick cloak that keeps me from feeling like I can even move sometimes. Lots of times. You assaulted me, but I didn't call it that. I'd grown smarter, like a ninja, trying to wrestle out of your grip. But it wasn't long before, in the least funny cat and mouse game ever, the vacuum sucked away my ninja strength, and I was a dead mouse in an unwinnable battle, but with one last resort. We all know one way you might calm down. It's taught in school, on the wrong conveyor belt. You shoved me down, a terrifying, nauseating, helpless, and lower than dirt feeling. That was close, though. Phew. You assaulted me, but I didn't call it that, and I was sleeping. Again. I thought it was my fault for 6 months because there had been drinking. I'd been dancing with people. Someone I love echoed this very same thing. Weren't you drinking and dancing with him? I, a well-educated professional this time. Another stupid night of being a girl. I raised a brow when you sent a new version, though, of that same line. I'm a vault. No one ever needs to know. Wait a second. I knew by then I'd survived domestic violence, dating violence. That was a doozy. But this rape stuff, not me. That happened to other people in bad situations. And I didn't need to talk about it. There was just that one almost time. And thank goodness that dead mouse girl still had a bit of brain power. One night I Googled, though, sexual assault, any unwanted sexual advance or contact. How could I not? Wait, does this mean that and that and that? Oh my God, it all was. So I stuck on another survivor badge, talked about it a bit, but mine really were not that bad. I'd done so much healing already. I was going to do the right thing and get on the over it train. Isn't that what nice girls do? The ones who don't get on people's nerves. But then you assaulted me, and I didn't call it that. It wasn't sexual, just physical this time, at work. Assault doesn't happen in public, broad daylight. Not to people like me. Had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Unless I was being found on the wrong conveyor belt, full of all that mischief and wrongdoing. Maybe this and the twisted violations that followed were the payback I deserved for all those wrong, disgusting, and hidden parts. I doubled down on hiding, like all the imprints combined. The vacuum suck of my breath leaving, the guilty, helpless girl in the wrong blouse, the dead mouse, the found criminal, the one who shouldn't have opened her mouth. You were on his nerves, you know. That's why your spine will never be the same. I can't help but think and wonder if you ever think of me, if any of those sick, venomous, paralyzing moments stayed with you, because they are seared into my being. Every day I fight to breathe. Every day I fight to move. Every day I grasp to retrieve words. They say I just need more confidence, as if maybe a cool outfit, wider smile, more bling, would have the wattage to revive decades of decaying parts. Or, let it go, they say, as though the poison you injected into my cells could be neatly packaged and dropped at the Goodwill. You assaulted me, but I didn't call it that. And I wonder how many other voices never found words, how many bodies never revived or would never out themselves. No court of law could make things whole again or bring shattered parts back to life. You assaulted me, but my story was never yours to write, my cells never yours to shape. I am here to say to the warrior child who fought, escaped, whatever it took to survive, that I breathe with oak tree lungs, raise limbs like her branches, draw my voice like rumblings of an ocean. My cells, 70% water, shift with every vibration I extend. Let reclaimed words reverberate to every body who can feel them, to every inner child whose spirit could never break. Our breathing, our being is the revolution. Every ripple of our voices, our bodies, our own power matters. Thank you for listening. I want to invite us to just take a moment here to breathe, to reflect, even take out a pen and paper and do a little bit of journaling yourself. I'm not going to say very much. One thing that can be helpful if a lot came up for you is to just notice physical sensations. You can complete the sentence, what's going on right now is in your own body. So I'm actually going to be quiet and invite us back to our breathing. Checking in with your heartbeat. Checking in with your own breath. Even moving a little bit. And coming back when you're ready. I wanted to share with you here, as we find our way back to each other, we always have two things. We have choices and we have human connection. So I shared my own email here if you'd like to reach out to me personally to chat further. And I know Dr. Alvarez shared resources and contact information in the chat, but I encourage you to reach out and connect wherever it feels like a next true step for you. The bottom line is this, that healthy sexuality is life affirming. Unhealthy sexuality is life destroying. I want to invite you back in here, just in any of those themes that came up. And Susanna, if you want to take a pause and take any questions or share comments, that was a long piece and there was a lot there. And if I were to tell every story, we'd be here all day, or I don't really know for how long. Healthy sexuality is life affirming. We have a choice to make when we choose to engage in connection and in sexual connection with a person. We hold pieces of their innermost parts. I tend to think that people who come to a talk like this do so because they care. and don't want to enter into intimate interactions and make anyone feel like they're dying. And so I want to get to the good news and the tools and the ways that we cultivate in the Rose model, the 3 levels are heal, empower, ignite, spaces where we can hold each other with care and with tenderness. I appreciate y'all sharing. I'm actually going to move through this next poll question just for the sake of time. But just asking yourself, what percentage of people do you think experience some type of abuse in their lifetime? 20, 30, 40, or 50%? The answer is actually 50%. So the bottom left-hand corner, when we look at all genders and all types of abuse, at least 50% of people will experience some type of, whether it's psychological, verbal, sexual, physical, there's financial abuse, there's religious abuse. You heard in the spoken word piece how this is tied to mental health and even physical health. So I'm not going to read the whole slide to you, but I do want to acknowledge that some people don't make it, don't get to survive. And those of us that have survived to this point, I want to recognize the reclamation in how we walk forward together, even with those who are no longer on this earth plane. On campuses, as we distill down here, and we're going to move into talking about alcohol and other specific factors that amplify sexual assault on campuses. But when we look at all genders, so women more than 1 in 3, about 1 in 16 men on campus, people who are transgender, genderqueer, or nonconforming experience the highest rates of sexual violence. The last thing I want to say about the types of violence is we've talked a lot about this interpersonal level, but remember there's community violence, systemic violence, and in that bottom right-hand corner on this slide, there's a little word called pandemic. And so anymore, no one gets a pass on trauma. And something that I would love for you to take with you today is that it is highly likely that someone you're interacting with in your relationships is going through some kind of trauma response at any given time. So a hidden truth and some good news is that the same things that cause violence, cause oppression, cause bad relationships, and cause bad sex for everyone. So if I flip this around, if we focus on good sex and good relationships, my theory is we can ultimately change the world. And this isn't just about sexual relationships. If we look at, this is the longest running study of adult happiness, the #1 predictor of adult happiness is our connections, our relationships. And not just like, it's not about having our one and only person. It's about having that web of connection. If it's 1, 2, 3 people where you can be real, where you can be your 1 in 400 trillion. So the rest of our time I want to use to how we connect the dots and how we practice healthy sexuality. Back to those 3 levels to consider. Chances are we're going to approach someone in a trauma response. So I'm going to, on a surface level, walk through the neurobiology of trauma. Acknowledging that trauma is a normal response to an abnormal event. You heard several trauma responses in that spoken word piece. This image is our ancestor, the tortoise, and that's where our most primitive brain response to freeze or shut down or dissociate comes from. That tortoise is not doing anything abnormal, and we don't choose the trauma response that our brain goes into. You might have heard of fight flight, and sometimes that is grouped with fight flight freeze. This next slide is complex, but what I want to emphasize is that it's an entirely different brain system. That when our brain drops down into freeze, this is when we feel like we're dying. We don't feel like we can, our brain does not feel like it can fight back or flee. Freeze or shutdown is the most common response in sexual assault. So I want to look at why that is. There's this thing called neuroception, which all you need to know is that's the choice that that reptilian tortoise brain makes. So we go through this process in healthy engagement or healthy sex. The brain says, can I do social engagement? And if we don't feel safe, the brain drops into flight. Can I survive this by running away? Can I be a spectator? Can I just act like I'm not really here? Next, we drop into fight. Can I somehow face this threat? I want to point out something here about sexual violence, that about 90% of the time it's perpetrated by someone we know. And so often the first emotion that hits us is total confusion. It doesn't occur to us to like punch this person in the face. And that's not where our brain goes. It's also important to bring up power dynamics. So you heard that in the spoken word piece as well. If there is a difference in age, body size, going back to intersectionality, if someone has power in terms of gender, any of those factors, it is even less likely for the brain to go into fight. It's too dangerous. So next we drop into appease. Can I survive this by hiding my true self or my feelings? And then down into that freeze response of shutdown, and then total dissociation or collapsing. Last thing about the brain is that in this process, the thinking part of our brain, hormones actually shut that down. So the part that controls speech and rational thinking doesn't work. So when people say, well, why didn't you do something? Or you say, why didn't I say something or get out of there? That's not how the brain works. Last thing is the water, the social influences. So when you think about your own brain unconscious responses, this is influenced by how were you socialized to respond? What was encouraged for your gender, people who look like you? A lot of times when I have this conversation with women, they say, I was encouraged to do anything but fight. So you can add in the comments if anything comes up for you there. And I also want to point out that these brain responses, we need them. They're not bad things. So fighting can help us set boundaries. Fleeing can help us get out of a dangerous situation. Freezing even can help us check out so we're not in constant anxiety and worry all the time. The problem is when we get stuck and we don't get to complete our stress cycle. And as human beings, we do this to each other by minimizing, marginalizing what happened, victim blaming, shaming. So how do we fix this? Well, if we look at sexuality and relationships, what if we had a roadmap for what is healthy? So the key here is when we go into shame in those trauma responses, if we stay in silence, in judgment, in secrecy, shame grows. Whereas if we can treat it with empathy, it loses its power. It starts to lose its power over us. I'm giving you a handout of these takeaways because I know we don't have time to get to every single thing that I would love to cover. I teach a a 3 to 6 month course on the Rose model, but I wanted to bring this up so that you could see how this works, this process from it starts at the bottom, the whole self, high regard, and I'll explain what I mean by dancing and magic. We all have these irreducible human needs of dignity, of safety, and belonging. And on the left-hand side, there's a resource I'll share with you. This is from Emily Nagoski. We take these journeys in sexual connection from this thought of the story of I am broken to I am whole, from I am at risk to I am safe, and from I am lost to I am home. So I want to apply this next to healthy sexuality, walking through how we can approach ourselves and other people as whole selves who are 1 in 400 trillion at all times, who walk with high regard. So this means I hold myself in high regard, I hold you in equally high regard. And all of these things, all of these factors go hand in hand. So in order to be honest with you, I need to feel safe. The less safe I feel, the less honest I can be. Same with freedom and respect, go hand in hand. Dancing, which we're going to demonstrate a piece of, is the action, the giving and receiving that nurtures healthy relationships, and magic is the release of your 1 in 400 trillion. So in healthy sexuality, what if we could dial this down to 3 ingredients? When you are approaching another human being: responsibility, mutuality, and joy. So what does this mean? Responsibility, it's defined as the ability to have a response. So everyone owns their own feelings, their own needs, their own thoughts, choices that they make, as well as their power and privilege. Mutuality is this shared desire or shared feelings. Mutuality gives us patience. It allows us to take other people's perspective. Privilege, again, going back to intersectionality, and we don't have time to cover all of this, but it is so important to recognize our own privilege in any dynamic. So when it comes to all of these factors that we've talked about, all of these identity markers, if we ignore them, we are in danger of these power imbalances that can cause consent infractions. And if we don't acknowledge privilege, we keep upholding this system of inequity. And finally, joy facilitates that release of the most of who we are. So next, I actually want to just type this in the chat because it'll be smoother for me. Can you please type in the chat your opinion, the most important sexual organ when we look at how we take care of one another? Do you think it is A, the brain, B, the clitoris, C, the skin, or D, the penis? All important organs. Thank you. So it is the brain. It is A. So when I think of how to take care of myself, how to take care of a partner, the most important thing we can do is take care of someone's brain. And that is why I spent so much time on those trauma responses, so that we can understand them. Okay, I'm going to hopefully play this video talking about consent.
We should talk.
I want to talk about it.
We need to talk about consent.
Which may seem hard. It's not really everybody's favorite subject.
It's not really a sexy word.
I don't feel like I used a lot.
Like we're getting something notarized.
It sounds very formal.
Sign here, here, and here.
Something you hear in the news.
But we should be talking about it.
Because this
And initial 3 times here
is the wrong way to think about it. Consent is more than just a legal term.
It's not a box to check or something to get out of the way.
It's about respect and listening.
It's communicating openly.
And it's how to have good sex.
I'd like to talk about that.
Really good sex.
I vote we talk about that.
And we will. But first, let's get some things clear.
Consent means you have ownership over your own body.
You have agency.
All the time.
And nothing can ever change that.
Not what you wear, not what you've been drinking.
Not where you are or what time it is.
Nothing.
Consent is something you own and share.
And you always have the right to choose what you share.
Just because you give consent to one thing doesn't mean that somebody has full reign of your body.
And you can always change your mind.
If you don't like what's happening anymore, it's perfectly fine to stop.
Peace out. Gotta go.
You don't owe anyone anything.
And it's okay to say no to some things and yes to others.
Communicating ensures that everybody is safe and feels respected.
It's also the key to great sex.
Because sex should be good.
And good sex is great.
Like really, really great.
You feel good about it the next day.
Clouds opening up.
And the day after that.
And you're completely in tune with the other person.
I'll do that again. I'll do it again right now.
So, how do we do that?
How do you know you have consent?
You gotta pay attention.
Sometimes it's verbal.
Yes.
No.
Those are pretty clear-cut.
Sometimes it's physical. You're really vibing with someone.
Returning loving touches.
Guiding each other.
Reciprocating.
Communicate with your partner.
Or partners.
Right. Communicate with them about what you like or don't like.
How are you feeling? How are they feeling?
Do they seem conflicted, uncomfortable, or tense, or even scared? Check in.
And if you're not sure, ask.
Is this okay?
Can I do this?
If not, they'll be glad you asked.
Because that's kind of sexy, actually.
Help your partner by being clear about your consent as well.
I don't want that.
Why don't we try something else?
Let's stop.
You don't have to feel shy or worried about what they'll think.
No one wants to have bad sex.
So guide them. Let them know what you like.
And if you don't know, you could find out together.
Being open and building trust can help you try new things.
And new things can be very fun.
Ask him.
Ask her.
Ask them.
And listen.
If you take care of them, they can take care of you.
And it's pretty nice to be taken care of.
Consent is mutual communication.
If it's not mutual, or if your partner cannot communicate
actively,
because they're asleep or passed out,
if they're intoxicated or high,
then that's not consent.
End of story.
Your standards for sex can and should be higher than just not a felony.
Find out what consent means to you and your partner.
Know what you need to feel comfortable and to enjoy sex.
Make sure your partner respects that.
And that you respect your partner.
Consent is not just a question of legality.
Not just who has permission to do what.
It's the basis for a healthy and happy sex life.
Whether you're having sex or not.
And it's okay if you are.
And it's okay if you're not.
Everybody's okay.
The only thing that's not okay is someone else making that choice for you.
Let's talk about consent.
Because we have to.
Because we need to.
And because we want to.
Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk with you about alcohol while I pull up my slides. So alcohol we know is a factor on college campuses. And what I thought was most interesting in brushing up on my research was that alcohol, it's called biphasic, the impact of alcohol. So when we first start drinking, it has this stimulant effect, and that's that buzz that we feel, right? So that's when something in our brain and bodies is like, oh, this is fun, and our culture teaches us like more is better. But what actually happens is that alcohol is a depressant. And once we get to a blood alcohol content of about 0.05, which is about 1 drink for an average size female body, or maybe 2, and it's impossible to say an average size body. So let's say 1 to 2 drinks for a female body, and 2, maybe 3 drinks tops if a male body is over like 220 pounds. Once we get over that 0.05 level, alcohol depresses everything. So that includes our sense of memory. It includes our consciousness, and it includes our ability to experience pleasure. So sexual functioning depends on blood flow, which depends on hydration, and alcohol zaps that. So we actually have less pleasure and less ability to feel sensation when we drink. The next thing that I want to say about alcohol, and comment in the chat if this is parallel for you, or if you see this in your friendships. What is most dangerous is it's not moderate drinking, it's binge drinking. And people tend to form a habit of this in college where they're not eating, where they are having, standing around only drinking for an entire evening. Do you feel like you see more binge drinking than moderate drinking in college? I saw Susanna nod a little bit.
Miss Lori, in the interest of time, because some people might have time commitments immediately following the 1:30, is it okay if we pause for a moment and do the drawing and then continue on with your discussion?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you everybody for being here, and I welcome all of you to please stay and continue listening, because obviously Lori's information is extremely valuable and she still has more to share. So if you do have the time, please do continue on with us. But for just this moment, I'm going to go ahead and actually share my screen, Lori. Here we go. Our prize drawing for the $50 Target gift card goes to Miss Nicole Corey. Wonderful. Thank you, Nicole. You are familiar with our prizing process, so you'll be receiving that gift form from the college, and upon completion of that, I will send out your gift card. Okay, thank you again very much. I'm going to turn it back over to Lori so that she can continue on with her presentation. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much. And I will pull this up just so you have a quick visual here. So we are at time. So I want to do two things, and Dr. Alvarez, if I could just check in with you. First, I want to thank everyone who does have to go. We are at time. I invite you to take with you one thing, and thinking back to those individual, community, and systemic or social levels. And going back to that line that healthy sexuality is life affirming. So can we take responsibility, mutuality, joy, and exchange that, dance with that in our lives to honor our fullest humanity? If it's okay, I would love to just show you the visuals that I covered in the alcohol piece for those who are here. And for the sake of the recording. Moving through, so you have a handout on the courage of consent and these specific phrases that you can use in your own life. If you just pick one to check in, are you good? How are you? Do you like this? Or what would you like? If you just pick one, you are holding and honoring someone's inner light. So we talked about alcohol. There are a lot of reasons that people drink, and feelings of sexual inadequacy is one of them. So that was why, and this is what I talked through with that myth that more is better, and the reality of this biphasic nature, and the way that time works in real life. By the time you get to a sexual experience, usually you're on that down curve where alcohol serves as a depressant. These are my Dahlia images, again, emphasizing the point of hydration and how important that is for our bodies, our health, our sexual functioning. And I mentioned that pleasure depends on sensations in the nerve endings, and alcohol decreases that. We talked about memory and consciousness as well. Of course, sex without consciousness is not sex, it's rape. And memory, part of the way that we have good sex is bonding hormones are secreted afterwards. And if we remember that experience, it amplifies the connection. If we have no memory, it diminishes the experience. This is an empowered tool for healthy sexuality. The video mentioned having standards higher than a felony for consent and healthy sexuality. This is a decision-making process that I teach with a catchy acronym. It can also spell the word truths. But in this climate, tested, it means whatever makes this experience safe for us. It could mean, hey, did you get your vaccine yet? Whatever makes this a safe experience that honors our own human dignity and safety. Honored when making a decision about intimacy or sexual connection means that we each honor each other's humanity. Respect for boundaries means that we can have this mutuality, this constant dialogue of what we like and don't like. Understanding expectations is a way that we can communicate our values. Does this mean this is an exclusive thing for you? What does this mean for you? Speak freely. Again, that emphasizes the importance of consent, and in sexual interactions, it's so important in any interaction that this is ongoing. And finally, trust. When we are sharing the deepest parts of who we are, can you trust someone else with your 1 in 400 trillion, and do you trust yourself with theirs? You have a handout specifically on this communication process that I've laid out. So I copied it here in a slide so that you can see it. The most important thing about healthy interaction is it is a two-step process. So first it is a self-check, and then secondly, you're ready to approach the other person. And if this needs to be done instantaneously, that's why it's so important to slow down and to have your own consciousness, to have your own wits about you. So you are 1 in 400 trillion. And I want to close by talking about the one thing that you can do to create change. So if you all want to use the chat, my challenge is, what is one thing that you can take with you today, whether it is on the individual level, whether it's on the community level, whether it's on the systems level? What is one action that you can take to make positive change and to create healthy sexuality? So you could choose something like recognizing these needs of human dignity and safety and belonging, and recognizing in your interactions when someone might be in a trauma response so that you can restore social engagement and humanity. There might be something on a community level, so exchanging that responsibility, mutuality, joy. There might be something on that systemic level. We talked about these top 2 risk factors of ending the normalization of aggression and harmful gender norms. So where do we go from here? If you've seen any of the Hunger Games, when the children are directed to fight each other, There is a point where, this is Katniss, she's going into the arena and her mentor finally says to her, Katniss, remember who the real enemy is. And instead of shooting the arrow at the other person, she shoots it at the dome, at the system. And I want to leave you with hope as the only thing that is stronger than fear. If we go back to, I will share these additional resources with you. I wanted to go to my Dahlia image. In the Rose model, we have this mantra that when we can build healthy connection, that I, in my 1 in 400 trillion, here I am in my fullest whole self and humanity. And the mutual reciprocal statement is, I am here for you. So what if we could carry this into our lives? Certainly it's not every single human relationship that is going to be a fully blossoming dahlia 24/7. We'd have way too many to carry. But what are the interactions that are close to your bubble where you can carry your 1 in 400 trillion and honor that in other human beings? Thank you. Here's my contact information. I don't currently use social media a whole lot, but I do exist and I am reachable. And you can reach me via any one of these channels. And thank you so much for the additional time and patience. And I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so that I can see your faces. And thank you so much for sharing of yourselves and your precious time and your energy. And if anyone would like to stay to share any feedback or questions, I can do so.
Real quick before we end the recording, I just want to notify if anybody is watching the recording from our YouTube channel and you are participating that way, stay tuned after the recording and I will share information on a slide on how to track your participation to show that you are here and that you've been engaged in this presentation via the recording. And we are also doing a second drawing for 2 additional $25 gift cards next week on Wednesday the 12th, that will be inclusive of all of our participants today that did not win, as well as anybody who is participating on via the video. So make sure to follow the instructions on the next slide to track your participation. Thank you again for being here. Thank you for watching the video if you have done so. And once again, thank you so much to Ms. Lori Rose for providing such powerful and powerful information. Thank you.